What I was just sharing is that there is an entire line of work on this issue that's mandated by the Human Rights Council. And we think it's important to see consistency across intergovernmental processes. So we encourage you all to keep your eyes out for the Secretary General's report on human rights, climate change, and just transition, which should be available in the fall, well in advance of the 30th Conference of the Parties. And also encourage you to follow on the 30th of June, there will be a panel discussion at the Human Rights Council where we will be joined by, among others, the Special Rapporteur on Climate Change and the Permanent Representative of Brazil to the UN offices in Geneva to discuss further this critical relationship between human rights, climate change, and just transition. So with that said, I would like to turn things over first for opening remarks to the COP30 Presidency Special Envoy on Human Rights and Just Transition, Denise Dora. Thank you very much for joining us, Denise.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm a human rights lawyer and a feminist activist from Brazil. And recently the COP30 presidents created a group of third special envoys for different roles. 10 of them are related to international work in all regions of the world. 20 of them are connected to specific points. We have a special envoy for racial justice in the peripheries, for health, for forests, oceans, indigenous people, and one which is my mandate on human rights and just transition. It is new, it's a new mandate. We are starting this work just a month ago. And but we found the decision of the presidents of COP30 very brave to connect the idea of a just transition with human rights. And it's still, the development of this mandate is still something to be fueled by all of us, all these conversations, the guiding principles from the Office of the High Commissioners, the experiences from people at community level in different parts of the world. And basically my role is to listen all these ideas, proposals, criticism, things that can be improved for the COP30 in Belém in November. But coming from a concrete experience in working with the human rights movements in Latin America, mainly, I have to say that we see this work in two directions. One is an opportunity to try to influence the climate agreements by incorporating the language of human rights and guiding principles that will help to raise the ambitions of the climate language. And for me particularly, there is one issue that crosses all different topics, which is the idea of do everything without any forms of discrimination. This is very important language for the human rights field, but for all of us and the whole humanity. So how we can incorporate in the mitigation principles, in the adaptation agreements, and the financing discussion, the principle that everything that will be done and need to be done will be implemented without any form of discrimination. This is really key because we know that the distribution of rights and resources are very unequal in the world, very unfair, and we don't want to build agreements for a new pattern of energy and status of humanity without considering that, or without chance or the risk to repeat the levels of inequality and discrimination that we are currently living in. So this is something that we are trying. It's not easy. In every negotiation, we have to review all the documents and see the language that is there. But there is an effort from the presidency of COP at this moment, and from ourselves, who are most of us also activists in our country and in the region, to incorporate this. Secondly, is not only reinforcing human rights language and principles, but also bringing the experience, the expertise of human rights movements in different parts of the world. It's fair to say that in every change that happened in the last 100 years, there was a human rights group or a human rights movement or human rights people who are, defending it or claiming it, mobilizing for it. And so if there are experts in transitions, these are the human rights people, transitions from dictatorships to democracies, transitions from slavery regimes for abolition regimes, slavery for a world without the right to vote for women to a world where everybody participates in political life. Transitions from situations where most of the kids, they don't have access to school or health, to situations or to realities where children can go to school and have their rights protected. If we think about the last 3 decades, how much human rights expertise by people, movements, the UN offices were brought into the documents of the UN conventions, different ones, the Convention on Population and Development, where we say that rights of women are human rights, or Beijing Conference, the Durban Conference, the Habitat Conference, the Children's Rights Conference. So in different areas of the development, we've been bringing human rights language and expertise and experience, and that's what we want to see in the climate change documents as well. So that's why the president's created this role. I have to say that it's a challenging one, but at the same time, the experience that I'm having in the last 3 days here, 4 days with you all, listening, learning, it's been a precious moment for me, and I'm trying to share everything with the presidents of the COP and see if we can get to a better decision and agreement in Belém do Pará. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And really appreciate the points on the importance of equality and non-discrimination in the context of the discussions you've had all across sectors and groups, as well as the importance of building a movement, which I think, by bringing all of society together, and the emphasis on what reflecting different voices and perspectives can add to this process. So our next speaker is the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of climate change. That's Elisa Morgera. And she will share with us some reflections about the role of her mandate and just transition and human rights, and what that means in the big picture. So over to you, Elisa.
Thank you so much. Is this working? No. So thank you so much all for being here. I think this is a very timely conversation, and in particular, I think in the framing of democracy. In my role as UN Special Rapporteur on climate change and human rights, I'm an independent expert. I'm supported by the UN Human Rights Office, but I seek to clarify the obligations of states and the responsibility of business and others, including international financial institutions, including research institutions, to contribute to the protection of human rights in the context of climate change. Last year, I published a report on access to information on climate change and human rights, because surprisingly, this has been a relatively less studied area of in the climate justice movement, but in fact, the access to information is a precondition for the exercise of all our human rights, including our civil and political rights. And without full, trustworthy, timely, and accessible access to information on climate change and human rights, none of our authorities at any level in any sector are actually empowered to effectively protect human rights in the context of climate change. But also persons, organizations in civil society, parents, carers are not able to make their contributions to the protection of human rights in the context of climate change. And that information really needs to be both kind of breaking down climate science and some of the methodologies to really show us to what extent our governments and business companies are doing the best that they can to protect our human rights in the context of climate change, but equally being integrated with evidence on human health, on the state of nature, water, human mobility, and culture, because these are all the areas of understanding that we need to bring together to really understand how climate change is impacting the life supporting systems on our planet and how it is impacting all the dimensions of human well-being that are protected internationally as human rights. This year, my new report, which is available online and will be discussed in 10 days at the Human Rights Council, focused on the phase out of fossil fuels as a matter of human rights. And there is a specific section which brings together all the latest evidence on how, in particular, fossil fuel companies for over 6 decades at least have contributed to climate disinformation, misinformation, and obstruction. There is now such advanced independent evidence on this that has identified a whole well-worn playbook of activities which go all the way to attacks, climate defenders, climate scientists, journalists, lobbying in public spaces. And there's even now models of profit sharing with other sectors in the business community to advance the climate disinformation, and how that in and of itself is a form of violation of our human right to information, education, and science, and of course the exercise of our civil and political rights based on that information. But also in itself, it has prevented effective human rights protection in the context of climate change for over 6 decades. And the rest of the report identifies obligations for states and also responsibilities, for instance, on the advertising community to protect our human rights to trustworthy information on climate change and human rights as an essential guarantees for protecting the formation of public opinion and democratic debate from undue commercial influence and misleading or false information on climate change and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisa, and I really appreciate you bringing the right to science into this discussion, as well as a number of other rights, because I think too often people don't realize that there is a human right to benefit from scientific progress and its applications, and that the actions of businesses and others in many cases in the context of climate change has been disrupting the realization of that right and hindering our human right to access to information as well. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next panelist, who is Michele Poletto from International IDEA. Michele, can you share with us a bit about your work on democratic governance and just transition, participation mechanisms, and institutional frameworks?
Yes, thank you very much, Ben, and thanks to all the speakers on behalf also International IDEA. Yes, let me focus on the other component of today's discussion, democratic participation. So International IDEA is an intergovernmental organization formed by 35 democracies all around the world. And among other emerging challenges, we are looking at the relationship between climate change and environmental degradation on the one hand, and democratic governance on the other hand. As you know, this is a complex and double relationship. So on the one hand, climate change impacts our democracies, both in the short term. Let's think about extreme weather events during elections, or in the long term because of all the deep societal changes that impact our governance systems. But on the other hand, democracies and political systems in general are called to formulate and to implement those policies to tackle climate change and to promote just transition. So while we are collectively failing in our pursuit of our climate targets, we don't go fast enough. And it is also difficult to establish clear relations between outcome of climate policies and specific political systems. There is evidence, we can say, that well-functioning democracies are the best place to implement comparatively better mitigation, adaptation, and transition policies. And this is because some specific inherent characteristics of democratic governance, namely free flow of information, transparency and accountability, rule of law, and public participation. So let me just focus on this point, on public participation for a minute. The issue with public participation in modern democracies, as you know, is that participation is very broad, or potentially is very broad, but it risks to be very thin. And you can see that in the feeling of distant public institutions or distrust towards public policies that in many countries you observe, and it is growing. Therefore, promoting and improving public participation is critical for legitimacy and effectiveness of policies, and including climate and transition policy. So in this sense, we focus on a number of issues, and some have been mentioned already. So first and foremost, take full advantage of political rights and continue protecting the integrity of elections. Secondly, as it has been mentioned by Elisa, the importance of integrity of information, and I would also add quality education in the long term. Third, protect the civic and legal space for protest, activism, up and including climate litigation, as it has been mentioned by Denise. And four, promoting complementary avenues for public participation. And I think about public consultations, participatory budgeting, which is a field where Brazil has done a lot, and community-led local planning, or deliberative experiences for like for example, climate assemblies. And I think that Alina later might mention more in details something about this. Finally, my last point is that alongside these areas, we consider very important to focus on institutional reforms or institutional innovation of the very core of our democratic system in a perspective of the long term, to go beyond this basic issue we have with democracies, which is a little bit the short term related to electoral cycles, 4 or 5 years horizon. And in this sense, we focus, we promote research and dialogues around long-term legal frameworks that bind successive governments, the building of parliamentary foresights in democratic systems, so the ability of parliaments to plan and prepare to different long-term scenarios, And last but not least, we are absolutely convinced that we need to promote and increase the role of independent authorities in our governance systems, be them advisory or oversight authorities, such as, committees for future generations or committees for climate change, ombudsperson, and other areas of other institutions of this field. And we hope that putting together all this menu and advancing on these different directions, we can have a stronger and more productive public participation for climate policies and transition policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michele. And so continuing along these lines and sharing some additional reflections on deliberative democracy and the human right to meaningful, effective, and informed participation, I'm very pleased to invite Dr. Alina Averchenkova from the Grantham Research Institute, who's joining us virtually this time to share some remarks about their work on national law and deliberative public participation to advance climate action. Alina, you have the floor.
Hello, and thank you so much for accommodating me remotely. I think in our 20 or so years of work on climate law and governance at the Grantham Research Institute at the London School of Economics, we absolutely concur with previous panelists that it is very difficult to address climate crisis without relying on the cornerstone of democratic institutions. But at the same time, I think what we're finding is that strengthening climate institutions and climate action could also help us deal with some of the rising challenges to the democracy. And so what I want to focus on in my remarks is firstly on the central role of the rule of law and national legal systems as being the key lever for ensuring that we build effective and just climate policies. And in our work, we've been maintaining at Grantham Research Institute the climate laws database. It's climate-laws.org. It's open access, and it tracks most climate and climate-related policies, laws around the world. And what we find is that currently there is almost no country that doesn't have either a comprehensive executive policy on climate change or some form of a climate law. However, we were interested to understand, do climate laws actually make a difference? And we've done several case studies focusing first on European countries, UK, Ireland, and Germany, and also New Zealand outside of Europe, which had climate laws for quite some time, but recently have reformed them to improve some of the key elements of infrastructure, governance infrastructure, and include net zero targets. And what I'd like to highlight from those studies is that there are 3 elements. We interviewed over 100 stakeholders across those countries to understand the impacts, and 67% agreed that climate law has made major positive contribution to strengthening national climate governance. And 3 key elements that I'd like to highlight. First of all, provisions that strengthen whole of government response, such as emission reduction targets, objectives for adaptation, and requirements for government to prepare cross-sectoral implementation plans for climate targets. And enshrining just transition requirements in climate law, as done in Ireland, for example, clearly leads to mobilization of finance and integration of just transition considerations in a better way than compared to countries that haven't done it. The second key element we find is something Michele alluded to, is independent expert advisory bodies on climate change. Countries that have created those and enshrined them into climate law have managed to depoliticize the information base that forms implementation and definition of climate policies and improves credibility, which is particularly crucial in the era of disinformation that we have already spoken about at this panel. And independent advisory bodies formed of independent experts have also allowed to touch on difficult sectors where are particularly key justice and distributional considerations, for example, agriculture sector in Europe and New Zealand. And finally, participation. That is an area that Michele spoke about already. What we find is that, of course, public participation is absolutely crucial to ensure that climate policies are legitimate, that we get buy-in from citizens, and the backlash that we're facing, in particular in Europe, but also in some other areas around the world towards climate policy, is a very clear demonstration of the importance of public participation in climate policies. And also to improving the quality of the response. Oftentimes there is a misconception that citizens cannot bring much to the discussion on the content of climate policies, but in our work focusing on deliberative public participation in Europe, and particularly citizens' assemblies on climate change, which are recruited from democratic lottery and then are composed to represent mini makeup of a country by population, gender, disability, political views, education levels. Those assemblies actually have been able to deliver very innovative and ambitious advice to governments, again, misproving misconception that citizens would be less ambitious than governments in the policy response that they recommend. So based on our research, what we're finding is that unfortunately not many laws still have included requirements for public participation in the development of climate policies. But the experience of those countries which have actually implemented public participation processes in a comprehensive way shows that they can be absolutely valuable and essential element in designing legitimate, effective, and policies that actually have buy-in from citizens. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. In the interest of time, we'll move right along. And I think if our remaining several speakers are as good on time as the first group, then we should have time for questions and answers and comments. So please start thinking about things you'd like to address to our distinguished panel. The next speaker is Bert Dewell from the International Trade Union Confederation, and we'd love to hear from you about the work that the Trade Union Confederation is doing on just transition and human rights. Bert, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you very much for the invitation. We were specifically attracted by the panel that you're organizing, Advancing Human Rights, Democratic Participation, Accountability. It's like a perfect framing for the discussions that we are having here on the Just Transition Work Program. Specifically on democratic participation from the trade union movement, we see this, of course, much broader than the 5-year or 4-year elections, voting in an election. Democratic participation starts for us also at the work floor, when you are an employee in a company, and the right to engage in processes on that level. It has been said several times here, protecting rights is building trust and is getting support in society for the ambitious climate policies that we need. It's exactly the opposite as what is being done by populist right-wing parties at this moment that create confusion and distrust in society and between groups. And that's why this rights agenda is so important for us. You have heard us saying it several times. For us, labor rights or human rights, labor rights are the backbone of any just transition. I would like to elaborate a little bit on this. For us, these labor rights that are defined at the ILO as fundamental principles and rights at work are in fact some kind of toolbox to implement social justice in climate policies through to the freedom of association, through social dialogue, through collective bargaining. We see that in countries that have strong labor rights protected and these institutions, there is less inequality, there is more participation in society. So for us, this is something everybody here at the conference speaks about: the need for climate justice, speaks about the need for fair policies, but the implementation is lacking. While the implementation exists since 100 years, that social partners are doing it. They just, often it's as simple as the Minister of Climate speaking with the Minister of Labor, integrating the climate objectives in the social policy aspects. And one of the important aspects is, how do you get this just policies, is by discussing with the people affected. And we had just a discussion on AIM here, and the statistics are very clear. If you only already look at the observer participants, the worker representatives are 0.7% of the observers at the climate negotiations. 0.7% of the observer participants are worker representatives. And all the politicians like to speak about the good jobs that will be created, but where they're speaking about, they're not at the table. Mm-hmm. For us, as I said, labor rights are crucial. And we have since 14 years a global rights index that we make every year to monitor the implementation of these labor rights. I'm gonna give three or four examples of where we are with this labor rights index that obviously is going back in recent years. First, the right to strike, the right to withhold your work when labor conditions are getting in danger, for example, by heat stress. Most of the countries of the ILO have ratified this convention and should apply it. But we see in countries like Brazil, presidency, Morocco, Belgium, we see arrests of workers that are striking. Erosion of collective bargaining, the negotiating through collective agreements, these policies. All countries have ratified this, but we see in many countries that these rights are being pushed back. Just to mention one company, Tesla, which has sites in Germany and in Sweden, refusing to negotiate with workers, firing workers that want to set up a union. And then finally, attacks on free speech, arbitrary arrests and so on. In many countries, we see unions being persecuted. And it's not only in developing countries, it's also in France, where recently union leaders have been arrested. In Belgium, it has happened. And for example, recently in Zimbabwe, like a group of trade unionists were arrested at a protest at a lithium mine on a 1 May activity. And this brings us then directly with the work that we are doing here. The technologies, technological solutions that are being proposed with the Teslas, the lithium mines, and that are needed for the transition. What's the impact on workers? If there is no protection of rights, there will be no trust in society, and we will not get to the ambitious policies that we need. And that's what we need to come to at the end of next week with the Just Transition Work Program. We can speak about many things in just transition, but if there is no definite and clear link with labor rights and the role and the impact on workers, for us, it will not be a just transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just echoing the point that labor rights are human rights, and you know, the need for solidarity across the different aspects of the human rights movement to ensure a strong just transition work plan here, and ensure human rights throughout climate action. So our next panelist is Lina de los Rios Torres from Yango, and I would invite you to share a little bit about the work you're doing on just transition and some reflections on intergenerational equity in the context of just transition as well.
Yes, I will speak a bit louder. But I thank you. I will start with saying that at this moment, as youth, we deeply feel that we cannot normalize. Oh, okay. It's too. Is this better? Yes, it is. Okay. Thank you. So to start over, I want to start with saying that as youth, at this moment, we feel deeply that we cannot normalize the world and especially the systems that we are currently living in and that we have created. Systems that deplete ecosystems, undermine democracy in favor of the rich and the powerful, and that simply put our futures on the line. Young people in the world today make up more than 1/4 of the global population, of which the majority right now is in developing countries. This is also next to the fact that young people in these countries are most vulnerable to climate change, as many of us have already heard in this conference. At the same time, young people are in the minority in shaping our policies and our laws, with distance or even exclusion from voting for young people from marginalized communities around the world. Youth voices are still sidelined, youth rights not meaningfully implemented, and climate strategies are often considering short-term impacts instead of long-term sustainability. A true just transition from our perspective is not just about green jobs or decarbonization targets. Of course, it's also about that, but it's more so a call to integrate social justice, intergenerational justice, and ecological balance into the policies that we make, and make sure that we are protecting livelihoods also for future generations. A just transition must also reject unlimited economic growth as default goal and center the well-being of people and planet and not profit. The good news, though, is that young people across the world are already leading this work at this moment. We are setting up climate tribunals to hold polluters accountable. We are building new kinds of businesses rooted in fairness and advocating for sustainability on the work floor. Examples including youth collectives that have launched solar cooperatives, energy cooperatives to electrify different areas from rural to urban areas, while creating or helping at least creating new local jobs. There are also young people across countries demanding their bosses to integrate sustainability into company operations. Next to that, young people are also organizing powerful spaces for co-creation, collaboration, and visioning, like in the Philippines, in Brazil, in Thailand, and so many other places where youth activists right now are leading actions to protect ancestral lands and also to protect ecosystems from extractive projects. And lastly, we are marching on the streets and we are present in these negotiation rooms, demanding justice with both our voices and our values, all with the goal of envisioning and co-create transformative futures where systems of exploitations are replaced with systems of care, and where the past is acknowledged rather than denied, and where justice and solidarity are the foundations of every policy that we make here. Coming back to Bonn, where we are right now, to SBs, we really need parties to be intentional and open up for consensus, and to open up for a collaborative process that will give youth meaningful outcomes and actionable outcomes, especially in the light of COP30, to prevent what happened in Baku, which was a great disappointment for the youth movement. Lastly, we cannot speak of justice while ignoring the violence that persists globally, including ongoing sieges, genocides, occupations, and the denial of basic human rights in so many places. So I want to conclude with asking you, are we closing the gaps or deepening them? Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to the panelists for their approach to resolving the microphone challenges as musical chairs. We could all use the game later, so we got back to it. Our next panelist is Gina Cortez Valderrama. And I suspect she'll have a lot to build on what the previous have said. She's joining us from the Women and Gender constituency. Please share with us
Thank
your
you so much.
reflections.
Thank you so much, Ben. A good day for everyone, and thanks for joining us in the last day of a tough week, in which every day feels like a month. I would like to take indeed many different elements from what my fellow panelists have been speaking, and I would like to start with the insights that Denise brought in terms of the current context in which we are living, where we see an increase of the far right. And this is something that is not just happen spontaneously or sporadic, or is just like happening in one single context, but this is something that we know that is organized, is very well funded, and is threatening two main things in the very first place. One of them is the pushback, the backlash against women's, gender diverse, and trans people's rights. And what we see is how this has been escalating in violence, being translated in murder. And what is happening there, that backlash that we see in terms of gender rights, is something that we also see in these negotiation rooms. That on one side. And on the other side, we as well see how the far right can agree very unanimously on anti-immigration laws. Anti-immigration laws that are seeing refugees, asylum seekers, and displaced people as an internal threat. And when we put these two things together and we make an analysis of the macro systems that sustain capitalism, we are actually going to find out that it is precisely these groups, particularly those that are racialized, particularly those that come from the South, the ones who sustain that capitalist system with their unpaid, unvalued, and unrecognized care and domestic work. So if we close that cycle and we see that it is not just a coincidence, it is because this system of murder, of threat, of imperialism, of white supremacy know whose bodies they have to exploit, know whose bodies are for free, subsidizing the exploitation as well of the territories through extractivism. So this is just not a coincidence. This is the feminist analysis that we have been bringing to the table since decades. Decades, coming every time, bringing this analysis. And when we are speaking about women's rights, when we are speaking about gender rights, this is what we are aiming to tackle. So when we are speaking about women's gender rights, migrant rights, is not just on how we're going to have a siloed conversation in one room, but how this interacts with the multiple topics and issues and emergencies that we are discussing currently. So when we come as well to intersect those conversations with just transitions, then we need to think, okay, let's have an honest conversation, and that just transition is for whom? And there is where we bring as well a notion that we have so much forgotten, and is redistributive justice. We are not talking about redistributive justice in this context of just transition. And that is also what is meant, because we have been listening about the importance of public participation, public consultation, participatory budgetary, but how are refugees going to be invited to these places? How are women, informal workers, waste speakers going to be part of these conversations? So this notion of just transition from a human rights perspective also needs to understand who is it really leaving behind, right? And that is the more the analysis that we need to be having. And this is part of the understanding, this is part of the analysis and the reflections that the Women and Gender constituency is bringing to the table and to the conversations. And to be very honest, we are very disappointed. We are calling for everyone in these rooms to parties in different regions, to our fellow activists, to put attention to the lack of leadership that is happening in this moment in this regard. The presidency, the co-presidency released their third, fourth letter, I'm not reminding. And I will just did again to reaffirm and perhaps not say something that is not real, but I confirm again when I did a quick search to the word right in that letter, and it's 0 times there. And it's a letter that is framing the 30 objectives of the presidency. And none of them speaks to rights. None of them speaks to gender. None of them speaks to Afro-descendant peoples. So how are we going to advance in this conversation and implement or work to implement those objectives if there is no notion of human rights there? And after mentioning these 30 objectives, they said that the presidency believes these key objectives will offer a structured and inclusive framework to mobilize collective action. How is this including women, refugees, displaced people, Black people identities? So we need to have a more honest conversation. We need to put that to the table because this year we are talking about the Gender Action Plan. It is not on the radar of anybody. And the Gender Action Plan is critical, not only for us advocates that are here, but because that is one of the most real and compatible packages of this convention that truly speaks to the reality of people everywhere. And when we speak about intersectionality in this negotiation term, it's because we are bringing as well the understanding that people with disabilities, Black people, migrants, house workers, like care workers have to be part of that conversation. So if we are not attentive to this, we are just going to perpetuate a transition that is just fueling an extractive system for the profit of some and not for the benefit of all. So I would like to put that as a call for action, as a call for having the attention and to move us forward in the next 6 months that we still have, because it's not that it's lost. It's not that there's no hope. It's not that we can have conversations, and therefore these conversations that we're having here is so important to have a conversation and get the things on the table. So we count with all of you to make this possible, and we count with all of you so that the transitions that we're speaking are truly for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gina, for the call to action and also for bringing the Gender Action Plan to the attention of the room. Certainly a priority for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And I could speak a lot towards the contributions, the submission we made on that, but we want to save time for some last remarks from a representative of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change, and then open things up. And while I look for the roving mic, I'd invite you to just have a seat here and go right ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the space and for the invitation to come today. I had an amazing time listening to all of you, and thank you for your leadership. I know you're doing a lot of work in all the fronts that we need to do. So just speaking about this quickly, I know I'm racing against the clock, but I think we need to get the just transition right, because this is not just about us. It's not just about our energy. It's not just about our jobs. It's not just about us as humans, but there are other 8.7 million species on this planet, and we need to get it right for them too. For us as Indigenous peoples, it's not just about us. We also have them into consideration in all of the discussions we have through prayer and ceremony as well. So I would like to make a few points today on what are some of the priorities from Indigenous peoples as we have these negotiations here. So first, we need to see in the just transition framework, as it's been developed, a commitment to a rights-based phase out of fossil fuels. It needs to be there. Also, all of the efforts that are described there should contribute to the reduction of greenhouse gases, the prevention of loss and damage, the protection of the climate ecosystems and biodiversity, and our ways of life as Indigenous peoples. Because oftentimes, we are on the front lines of these issues and the first ones to get impacted. The other thing is that the term just transition and the criteria hasn't been properly defined. It has to be defined, and we have to know what the criteria is. Why? Because if it is not well defined, then there will be lots of other activities that are taking place under the banner of just transition that simply are reproducing those harms, those risks to Indigenous peoples, and those colonial practices of extractivism. And also for our rights perspectives, knowledge systems, and lived experiences must be considered into the definition, criteria, and implementation of just transition. UNRIP and the preambular paragraph 11 on Paris Agreement offer a good framework on what is just. And I would like to note quickly that around the world, there's a lot of mining, mega dam construction that is taking place, monocultures like palm oil for biofuels, industrial wind farms that are examples of projects that are taking place and carried out without Indigenous peoples' free, prior, and informed consent. And that's why we need to define what is a just transition. Because if we're just going to reproduce the same things, then that is not a just transition. We also have to talk about the impacts of industrial agriculture, because they contribute a lot to greenhouse gas emissions. We have to, and Indigenous practices offer a lot of ways in which we can live in balance with the earth in sustainable ways. And finally, I just want to say quickly, I know we are talking a lot about accountability here. 54% of minerals that are currently extracted for the energy transition, for EV batteries, for solar panels, wind farms, are being extracted from the lands of Indigenous peoples. We have the UN Secretary General's report from last year, which outlines principles. That work needs to be institutionalized, and we need to move that work forward. We also need grievance and redress mechanisms that work for Indigenous peoples, as established in the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and UNRIP. Because how else are we going to communicate with the private sector? How else are we going to bring our grievances to them when they violate the rights of Indigenous peoples? And they need to be open, transparent, and they need to work for us. We also need a traceability system. We need to know where those minerals are coming from. Did they obtain free, prior, and informed consent? Are they abiding by environmental and human rights safeguards? And I just want to call your attention quickly to the several standards that are currently being developed around mining for these minerals. These standards need to uphold the minimum standards in UNRIP, the minimum standards of human rights. And just finally, we've been hearing a lot everywhere around the world, a lot of talk about energy dominance from countries, moving away from multilateralism to deals that are done between one country and another, and that puts indigenous peoples at risk. All of these geopolitical tensions put us at risk as indigenous peoples, and we need to find a way that we can work together, that we can do this work on a just way that upholds the rights of indigenous peoples. Thank you.
Brilliant. So thank you all very much for joining for the discussion. Now we'd like to open things up for questions, and I think we should have time for 3 or 4 questions or comments and remarks from the audience, at which point we'll come back to this panel. It was important we heard all these voices. They'll have to be very concise in sharing any final reflections. So here, and here.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to all the panelists today. It's been a wonderful discussion. My name is Dana Souza. I'm a citizen of the Métis Nation, one of the 3 distinct Indigenous identities in what is now Canada. I'd like to thank my colleague from the IIPFC for bringing forward Indigenous issues into this space. But I think that underlines a problem that has not only occurred within this space, but within the just transition space, all throughout any kind of climate action. And that is the erasure of Indigenous rights. That is the exclusion of Indigenous peoples from democratic processes, from labor rights processes. And I'm very curious to hear from the other panelists why Indigenous rights do not come up in your interjections, because there's an intersectionality between everything that's shared here, and Indigenous rights form the basis of human rights, because Indigenous rights are essentially who gets to be human. In my country, 50 years ago, I wouldn't have been allowed to vote, and I'm from Canada. So there are Indigenous peoples right now who do not have the ability to take part in these processes. And even when we look forward to COP30 with the Indigenous Peoples Commission being put forward, even that has some kind of murky backgrounds to whether FPIC has been rolled out or properly established within the development of those commissions. So I'd like to hear from some of the other panelists on how Indigenous rights and upholding to Indigenous rights factors in to a successful just transition from your perspectives.
Thank you. I had 2 in the front.
Yeah, Niti from Climate Action Network, Southeast Asia, from Malaysia. And we have, CANSI has been co-hosting Just Transition Forum Asia for 4 years. This year will be our 5th year in collaboration with the German foundation Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, attracting up to more than 800 registrants from over almost 60 countries. So this year it'll be held. I'd like to echo the previous person's comment that this has been very interesting and very diverse and excellent panel discussion. I have a question to Denise on the host country agreements, because I really liked what you said about ending all forms of discrimination, and whether you are involved in the development of the host country agreement, which civil society organizations like Climate Action Network want it to be non-discriminatory, ease of access, and representative, including like the groups Gina mentioned, refugees, informal workers and all, and of course, providing access like through visa and economical accommodation, etc. So whether you are involved in that process of developing the host country agreement, and I think Brazil has the opportunity to make that agreement a model for future countries, which can be adopted as a best standard. And then I also just wanted more information from Elisa on the special report on the phasing out of fossil fuels. And yeah, just more information and when we can access the report, because it sounds very interesting.
Great. You can pass the mic directly on you, and if there are other 3 more, we'll almost definitely have to stop there. Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Pia Björpaka and I'm from Finland and officially representing here Tungo, but talking on my own capacity, especially giving you some thoughts regarding this discussion on democracy and how the democracy helps participation. And in those countries, usually with the democratic values, the climate issues have been taken on board more broadly. But I would like to point to your attention that that's not the case always. Even if you are a democratic country, switch can happen very fast, like what is happening right now in Finland. There has been talks about putting like the scientific panel on climate issues under the Prime Minister's office. And there has been a huge reduction of the participatory measures in Finland regarding not only climate issues, but especially workers' rights. And they are so linked because there is this political right has been also restricted to 24 hours. So my point is that you need to keep an eye on democratic countries also. It's not self-evident that you have the participation rights there forever. They might collapse very fast.
2 rows back.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to the panelists. My name is Silosius Chaturuka. I'm from Zimbabwe. My first request, I had my colleague who was presenting on labor participation. I just wanted to share the source of that statistic that you spoke about. And secondly, I really appreciate your observation on the limited participation of labor organizations, because we have been talking about private sector participation, but we are only looking at the business, the employer side, and not the employee side. Yet when we are talking about this, we need to have a whole of society approach, because climate just transition, it is both, it affects both the employees and the employers. Then I also, from the ministry that I'm actually from the Ministry of Public Service, Labor and Social Welfare, and we are also in charge of the refugees, etc. So in most of the conversations that I've been following through in this, in these various meetings, I have made, or there is little reference to the refugees. I've only had it in this particular meeting, but it doesn't mean that this group is not there. It's a reality, given that we have wars around the world. We will see more and more people seeking refugee in other countries. So what are we saying as we try to address issues of climate and just transition? Then this one, I think the last is actually in appreciation to the to social and intergenerational justice. I think it's important, because we need not just to focus on ourselves, but to consider even the generation to come. Thank you very much. I'm not sure.
Just made it in. So hi everyone, my name is Anya and I wear many hats, but I'm an international law student in the University of Amsterdam currently. And my question is for Elisa. I have reviewed the report on the fossil fuel influence, and I've looked at just at the end of the multilateral reforms recommendations, and it speaks to kind of treaty negotiation processes and recommendations around that. So to kind of bring it back to where we are now in the SBs and Bonn in relation to COP, is there any kind of reflections that you would have along that same line of reforms that could aid in kind of the accountability around fossil fuel influence?
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Lydia Machaka. I work for SITSE, is a Catholic social justice organization based in Brussels, but we do have networks and allies outside of Europe, Latin America, and in Africa as well. So I just wanted to follow up from what others have said, particularly in terms of climate migration and refugees as well. I mean, the church, or let me say faith-based organizations, are also critical in this area because they're also in the front lines of receiving victims of all sorts of injustices that are happening as well. So we really feel what is happening and can relate as well. So I wanted to really talk also beyond just addressing or receiving victims of injustices as well. We're also trying to find ways to also improve the quality of responses that are happening on the ground and also promote innovations on the ground as well. But I wanted to touch on what others have said earlier on, especially we're talking about science, you know, and the science is out there, yes, and we can really see it. But in current NDCs and also synthesis reports that we've seen on NDCs as well, it seems like there are places where, yes, there's recognition of civil society participation and other stakeholders, but we don't see any input from that being part of what we are seeing in the next set of NDC. So I'm just really talking about science because there's knowledge, there's experiences, different sciences, indigenous knowledge systems that we're not seeing. So how can you help the integration of these different knowledge systems in the science that we really need linked to realities on the ground? So also understand that also part of the problem of civil, or let me say, broadening participation, it requires time, requires finances as well. So how can we also make, I don't know, parties or whoever is here understanding that this process is very important, it needs resources as well. We need to channel this information right there as well. So how can we find ways to channel the finances where it's needed the most? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And a lot of rich and challenging questions. We unfortunately don't have a lot of time to respond to those. But I'd invite the panelists to respond to one or two things, share a thought to leave us all with and inspire us all with. You're going to have between 30 to 45 seconds or so if we actually get out of the room on time. And I'd invite Denise to kick things off because I know she has another engagement.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll be very objective on the host country agreement. Yes, we are talking about that. And you are totally right. I think Brazil has the opportunity to have a good agreement. One of the points that we would like to see, so I'm talking with the presidents of COPI to develop this. It also goes to President Lula. And so there is a whole process of building the document. But it's the right to have a peaceful protest and manifestation. So this is very important. You know that Brazil is not an easy country, and we are engaged in the Minister of Human Rights to be in touch with the governor of the state of Pará and to have some workshops with the police forces in order to have a standard that it's a state obligation to give access to peaceful manifestation. So this is one important, and also about visas and migration and all these things. The point is there will be in Belém a space for COP, which is the official space, the green zone, but there will be the blue zone, but there will be a green zone with lots of side events as well. So the idea is to make sure that in all spaces where people can organize themselves, participate, have marches and events, there will be respect and non-discrimination. This is our hope, this is our effort, but let's see if it happens effectively. We hope so. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And over to Elisa.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the questions and comments. Maybe to try to respond to the first and last together. One thing that was actually a key recommendation from the Access to Information report last year was about the importance of connecting different knowledge systems, centering indigenous science, but also the lived experiences of those most affected by climate change into our knowledge base, and really very much challenging that idea, which I've heard several times also in side events this week, about the fact that, we have data gaps. We don't understand what's happening at the local level. The knowledge is there. And in fact, that local knowledge is also very much planetary knowledge, understanding of how we're all linked in many ways to the life supporting system. And the only way to really advance that understanding and have much more synergistic science and evidence base is through knowledge co-production. And that's what climate finance should support as climate action, not as something prior to climate action. This is how we co-develop climate solutions. In addition, in the fossil fuel report, I have several thoughts around how to fully recognize and better protect indigenous people's rights, including there's a section on the human right to remedy in the context of defossilization, and how the element of restitution of territories and socio-cultural and ecological rehabilitation in accordance with indigenous, and in fact led by indigenous science and knowledge systems, can be the most meaningful place for transformation. Very, very briefly on the point of COP reform, there is a paragraph in the report that hints at quite a few things that need to be addressed, both in terms of tackling and untangling a whole legacy of climate obstruction and disinformation and lobbying within the process. And of course, the need for meaningful, tangible advancements on mitigation, without which the credibility of this process is at stake. And some recommendations, including for the UN and the Secretariat around their role in preventing and tackling conflict of interest. But there could be much more that I could expand upon. So there's future work in the making on that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Right over to you, Michele. I can bring a mic to you.
It's okay. Thanks. Yes, very quickly on the point of democracies, and it's not enough to be a democracy to guarantee participation and effective policies. Absolutely, that's exactly what we witness these days, and it's the quality of democracy that matters. And it is with growing populism and reduction of civic space, it's crucial to keep an eye on the quality of our democratic systems and protecting that space, promoting democratic resilience. Migration, refugees, another crucial aspect, and international idea this year in its flagship publication, The Global State of Democracy, which will come out in the fall, will focus exactly on migration and democracy. So how to protect and guarantee civic and political rights in the context of migrations, both economic migration and forced migration, so refugees. And finally, to nourish this debate together with the Grantham Institute and other organizations, International IDEA has recently launched a group, a community of practice called the International Climate and Democracy Coalition for exchange on research and common activities and to create a common voice between the action on climate, democracy, and human rights. And so we hope that we can stay engaged on these topics in that framework as well.
Thanks a lot. And we are running a little bit over time. So I just say like 30 seconds, quick, your key thoughts. Go ahead, Gina, and then I'll go to Alina and the rest of the panel.
Just a quick thought on the question on the finance and sources and so on. Apart from the responsibilities, the historical responsibilities from countries and the framework that we speak here, let us look to the financial flows that go to militarism. Almost 3 trillion in 2024, an increase of 9%, goes to murder. So if we're talking about transitions, like towards which systems are we transitioning? And I think that that is a connection that is lacking here. when we also understand that we are not even measuring the emissions that comes from the military complex. So the call for demilitarization is beyond the call of course, peace and liberation, but it's also how we are going to find resources and how we are going to find as well a way to decrease these emissions. Thanks.
Thank you. Elena online. And
I'll
let's
conclude with an example. In 2018, Peru has adopted national framework law, but they haven't consulted with indigenous communities, despite there being a law requiring that. So facing criticism, the government launched an extensive public participation process and engaged, including as part of that process with indigenous communities when developing, implementing regulation for that law. As a result of that process, a new platform has been created, national platform for indigenous peoples on climate change. A seat for that representatives of the platform has been created on coordinating body on climate change, and indigenous knowledge has been formally recognized as an official form of knowledge under Peruvian law when designing climate policy. I'm bringing that up because for me, it demonstrates that it can be done, and also the benefits of running an inclusive participatory process and creating a seat for all. And I think we really should very urgently move the discussion from calling for the need for just transition to focusing on how we're actually going to do that.
Thank you very much. So Bert, Lena, Brian, quick as you can.
So there was a specific question on the erasure of indigenous rights from labor rights. I don't agree very much with that. For the trade union movement, indigenous people rights are an integral part of our just transition demands and our view on labor rights. We have explicitly endorsed that. We also have instruments at the ILO, the International Labour Organization, that picks that up. And also we have many indigenous people that are workers and that are represented in the trade unions everywhere in the world, where we work with them very actively. And we are keen to step that up and work even more in that way. Thank you.
Go ahead, Lena.
I just want to amplify what our sister from Zimbabwe said about the importance of really thinking about the world that we want to build and want to leave. And also what our brother from Canada mentioned, that there are a lot of communities, especially indigenous communities, that have a distance to, for example, being able to vote and how that shapes our societies. And that is really something that has to be tackled and can be tackled. Just amplifying those messages.
Yeah, so just final reflection. So for countries, right, on the building of democracies, I think we need to make a very strong message to parties that the way you treat your indigenous peoples and your ecosystems is a reflection of who you are as a country. It's a reflection. And when it comes to all the agreements here, we want to see our rights explicitly mentioned in the Just Transition Work Program, but also in all of the agreements that we're making here. And we want to see implementation also. And we need to see the protection of environmental and human rights defenders. They are at the front lines, and we need to do more to protect them. Many of them get killed every year, especially in Latin America. In Brazil, for example, the representative was just here. Let's start there.
Brilliant. So I think that human rights, and including rights of indigenous peoples in the Just Transition Work Program, is a wonderful closing note in protection of environmental human rights defenders as well. Really thank you all for joining us on behalf of OHCHR, International IDEA, and the Grantham Research Institute. We're grateful to the panelists, the audience, for being with us today, and invite you to go out and make sure that your negotiators know human rights needs to be an operative text of decisions made here at SB 62 and at COP 30. So please spread the word, and thank you for joining us. A big round of applause, please, for our panelists.